All right, well, thanks everybody for coming out. I hope you have a good evening tonight. Before we get started, can we just get a quick round of applause for River for allowing us to come here? Especially for meetings. I think there's more people involved, but I know she's very involved, so thank you very, very much. I'm going to introduce you tonight to Tim Niemeyer. He is a huge Bitcoin advocate that it's inspiring to say the least as to how much things he gets involved in. He's a co-host of the Lincoln Land Bitcoin Meetup. He contributed to Bitcoin Magazine, and somehow in his spare time outside of work, he managed to write a book. So he'll be speaking on that tonight. It's called The History Echoes Bitcoin. And without any further ado,
thanks, Shannon.
Woo!
Thank you, Rick, for having me. Like Shannon said, I'm Tim Niemeyer. This is my book. I'm really not going to spend too much time talking about the book, more of like considerations for orange pilling, my rationale. Let me go ahead and jump in. Like he said, I'm an elementary educator. I have been for 16, 17 years. In the summer, I teach at STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. We teach at, actually, they're out of Ohio, Camp Invention. Anybody heard of them? National Inventors Hall of Fame? Yeah, so I do that in the summer. I've also been a musician my whole life, and in the last few years, I've gotten to teach elementary music. So I'm the guy singing Kumbaya with kids. It's pretty fun. I am also co-host with Dan Rentmeister at Lincoln Land Bitcoin. Started writing for Bitcoin Magazine last year, 5 or 6 articles as a guest contributor. Just released History Echoes Bitcoin, self-published in, 4th of July. And even more recently, just started with Wiser as a content creator. I'm really looking forward to them. And if you don't know what Wiser is, it's an educational app. You earn sats by completing Bitcoin modules. It's a no-brainer. So check them out. All right, so the subtitle, Understanding the Value of Bitcoin's Properties Through the Lens of History. I think number goes up when it's going up, sells itself, right? People here at River do a great job. The industry does a great job of supporting that. So when I go to Orange Pill, I don't really focus so much on number going up. I don't focus on the qualitative aspects of Bitcoin, I focus on the quantitative aspects. And I think that's a way easier reach, and I'll explain why, when Orange Pilling news. So I arbitrarily picked these 8 different properties that Bitcoin expresses, and in each chapter I take 5 sections, vignettes from history, and try and tie them together in a way to kind of create an arc of history when you zoom out enough to really make it easy for somebody to understand Bitcoin. As an educator, I kind of geek out on trying to explain things. And thanks to the fine people at River for letting me steal their slide here. We got the adoption funnel, and obviously when we talk about orange pilling, it usually comes at the top. And as you know, many people don't have any understanding. Not even understanding of just the basics of Bitcoin, but even like conceptually, when you say 21 million, they don't even know what that means, right? Let alone talking digital money, right? So you gotta, when I try an orange pill, I gotta try and understand who I'm talking to, know their background knowledge. In education, we have this thing called the zone of proximal development. It's like, you gotta know how much they're able to learn in a short amount of time, right? So if I start out with, Nakamoto consensus, it's already out over their head as a huge example. So you gotta really bring it down to what they know and what can they get. And that's the low time preference idea, is that you're not gonna get them on their first touch point. You gotta keep coming at them in different ways, knowing what works best for them. I personally, and by the way, this is just my take. Everybody has their own style, and everybody should have their own style of orange pilling, whatever works for you. I'm just trying to give you a different take on how I look about it. I'm not so much right or left, and I try not to go blue or red at all. If anything in the book, I really focus on authoritarian versus like liberty. I focus on centralization and decentralization, power, the people that have the power versus the people that don't, and how does that fare. So, like I said, qualitatively, not quantitatively so much. Because if you come at somebody, if you come at somebody with a political topic, Like if I just said COVID, or if I said Ukraine, you already lost half the room probably, and you probably triggered somebody. You know, in education we talk about trauma comes in all forms, and anybody alive during that time, we all went through our own traumas, right? So even if you mention, in my mind, how Bitcoin fixes this, you've already triggered them and their brain's off and you've lost their attention in a way. Way more for kids than adults, but you get the point. And then also zooming out, like I said, not so much quantitatively, but qualitatively. So Bitcoin, like I said, expresses these properties. So that's kind of what I try and zoom out on. So that's kind of what I think about when I try and orange pill. I try and put some brakes on because I, like anybody else, like when I first started learning, I wanted to talk about all the tech. I wanted to talk about the supply. And my friend was at, you know, he had young kids and he was just like, can I buy diapers with them? You know what I mean? It's like he was so far away from where I was. So you got to bring yourself to them. John Medina is a brain scientist. He's like, what he always said, what's obvious to you is obvious to you. And that's a great way to think about it. You really got to put yourself in their shoes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the properties. I pulled out 2 sentences from each chapter. I'm going to show you the sections that I chose. From here on out, if you have questions, you know, just bounce them off. Otherwise, I'll read to you a little bit, you know, a little story time. So, first chapter I picked was permissionlessness, and you can see the different topics. I picked in the book not only examples, but non-examples. They need to be able to see how permission throughout history, or I guess permissionless throughout history, has yielded better results, or when there's too much permission required, that's when things get a little hairy. So, one could argue that the absence of obtaining permission is still a concern in modern society. Many people in power use justifications for their overreach while ignoring basic human decency. Like, for example, Protestant Reformation. Back then, the church told you how you needed to pray, right? They even sold indulgences. You would have to pay to get your sins removed. And that's, to me, a wild concept. When we talk about gaining consensus, history has been begging for a system that consistently and reliably respects the will of the many. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to avoid our own human nature. And early on in these chapters, I hardly talk about Bitcoin, right? I'm really focused on the properties. I'm really focused on connecting the idea that this thing is valuable to something that they might know. And the cool thing about this structure, if you will, it doesn't even matter what these are, right? We all have experiences. You all have experiences, and you know what connects yourself to your past, you to your friends. So as you think about this kind of thing, think to yourself, where else in history was gaining consensus important that whoever I'm talking to, I can make that connection. And then if you do this for all of the different properties, by the end of it, it's a pretty easy sell. Well, Bitcoin expresses all these, right? I'm getting ahead of myself. Interestingly, when I was doing my research on this, the Grand Council of the Six Nations, the Iroquois, they were the Grand Plan of Peace. Crazy idea, the different nations, hey, let's just leave each other alone, but defend each other when needed. Pretty crazy thought. In fact, during the forming of the Constitution, this was used as kind of a blueprint. So for decentralization, history has repeatedly yearned for the implementation of systems that utilize some form of decentralization. Powerful people have had to deal with the repercussions of their greed and desire to centralize power and authority. And that last sentence kind of speaks to the fall of the Roman Empire. I mean, they were very powerful, but they were also centralized, right? And the farther they reached out, the harder it was to grasp that power and that control. So why not, if we had a system in place, that kind of, I hate to use the word force, but forcing function of decentralization, that starts to permeate through our culture, hey, you got a better society, in my view. Trust minimization. History is rife with examples of us trusting the wrong entity. What we should learn from these episodes is not to be less trusting. Rather, we should embrace protocols that minimize the need for trust. Right? I really enjoyed learning about Victor Lustig, and I did all these pictures with DALL-E, you know, the AI. So Victor Lustig is the guy who sold the Eiffel Tower, that wasn't his, not once, but twice, right? And back then, you had to trust. Imagine if you had a system in place, again, right? So a lot of examples and non-examples. The development of social consciousness can only be furthered when the shackles of intellectual restrictions are removed. We can work toward countering the current state of censorship through the use of censorship-resistant tools. If you're not familiar with Samizdat, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. Think of Soviet Russia after Stalin. Everything was censored. You know, not just books, but movies, audio. I'm a musician. Jazz music was censored. Come on, right? So what they would do is decentralized. They would make their own in their basement using onion paper, which is like carbon copy, shove papers in their jackets, and distribute their information that way, right? Example of censorship resistance. It helped people get information. So the property itself is valuable. And the hope is, if whoever you're talking to about these properties believes in at least some of them, that they add value throughout history, then Bitcoin is a much easier sell. Open source collaboration. History shows us that open source collaboration is superior to closed source proprietary solutions. Open source software offers freedom equally to users and developers. Liechtenstein, crazy governance. They have a king and a queen, but they also have a direct democracy. And the people in Liechtenstein can vote for referendums. They can offer up referendums. They can go to all the town meetings, and even if it gets bad enough, they can kick out the king. So imagine a governance structure that's completely open source, where everybody has a say. Crazy thought, right? I'm just going to keep scrolling through. I would say anything. So. Immutability leads to value preservation. As we are better able to save what we want for as long as necessary, we're better able as a society to come to a shared consensus with all data available to everyone. And the best example I like in here, when you think of the Ten Commandments, immutability doesn't have to be physical, right? The ideas, they sustain, they permeate, right? So if you're not familiar with that story, with the Ten Commandments on tablets, from down to the bottom of the hill, they break, they had to go back up, get another copy. The commandments were still there, right? People knew it. They were distributed by nodes in a way. And finally, scarcity. It's a common assertion that scarcity is a reminder to appreciate what we have. We tend to cherish the things in our life that are rare more than the things that are plentiful. And I think we can all agree the most valuable thing in the entire world is time. We don't get it back. And I think we're all in agreement that Bitcoin has the best opportunity to save our time so we can use it the way we want, right? And after I go through that, I kind of conclude and go back over each of them and then really start to tie in Bitcoin, because now you kind of, like in education we call front loading. We front loaded whoever we're talking to with the information that they need in order to get to the point where we want them to be. So if you notice they're here in their understanding and you want them up here, you got to scaffold them, is another term, up to that. So after we've kind of done that, we can really get into Bitcoin. And oh, by the way, it expresses all of these properties. So I end with a thought experiment. Let's pretend there's no price to Bitcoin. It's a static price. It's just, don't even worry about price. You still have the ability to choose and interact between the fiat network and the Bitcoin network. Which one would you choose? And if you go down the list, every single one, at least to me, doesn't sound pretty for fiat. But in Bitcoin terms, at least in my view, that's the world in which I want to live. And I feel like I try to make that case through the sections. So that's what I have. If you have any questions, please shoot them out. If you guys want to just start a conversation, I'm in for it. Let's do this.
Stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice presentation.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, so when was your Bitcoin acceptance moment, and did it take somebody to get you there, or did you just kind of do your own readings and self-discover?
I'm naturally curious, but it's funny. Of all the people that orange pilled me, my retired farmer father, actually got me into Bitcoin. It was more of I trade options and I want to do something risky. I want to be on the risk curve a little bit, and he introduced me to that. And I had a natural inclination to decentralization, liberty through there. So it was a real easy sell for me. Once I started digging in, and then when COVID hit, had all this time, so for me, it was pretty easy.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, what prompted you to actually write that book that you just presented?
Literally the thought that, like I was telling some people beforehand, my best friend read the book and he's like, I really like it, but the biggest thing about it is just that idea that if you zoom out far enough, right, and you focus qualitatively, not quantitatively, if you focus on the value of the properties, that just is an easy arc to see from where we've been in history to where we're going with Bitcoin being that next step. And from there, it just wrote itself.
What was your writing process? Did you write in the mornings before school?
Yeah.
In the summers?
So I have an 8 and a 10-year-old.
Okay.
And they're both very busy in their extracurriculars, and they're great at it. So, it was funny because just like that half year before, you know how Bitcoin changes you in different ways, time preference, whatever. Like I went down the whole health rabbit hole, and I started eating different and working out different, and I started waking up at 4:15, 4:30 in the morning. So I still had an hour until the kids got up. So I banged that out literally every day. And then if they had play dates or on the weekends, I would steal away a couple hours here and there. But yeah, definitely getting up early was the best thing for me.
How long did it take
6 months.
for the first drafts?
Oh, yeah. No, because I had the idea early January, started writing, and just kept writing. Brought on Joachim Book, phenomenal editor, financial historian. He's an author himself. He actually just got done editing Lynn Alden's next upcoming book, so waiting for that to come out. Has that come out yet?
No.
It's soon, right?
Soon.
Yeah. So got him in around May, and he burned right through it and had so many great ideas. He's so efficient, and he was the guy that put all the references in, right? I approximated as close as I could with my sources, and he's like, nope, that's wrong. Fix this. But yeah, it's a fun process. Yeah.
It's totally new to me, so
Please.
if it sounds kind of stupid, just bear with me.
I'm an elementary teacher, so there's no stupid questions.
With everything going on with the dollar right now,
Uh-huh.
and with the other countries and they don't want to take our dollars, and just all the changes that are happening, do you feel like Bitcoin is more of a safer place to function than, with everything happening, especially right now?
I'd say absolutely, and not in terms of the dollar price, the dollar exchange price. And I think of it, and I don't know your entire story or background. I want to talk to you more specifically about how much you know. If you're 21 million, you're familiar with that concept. Okay, so there's a supply cap, right? There's only so much that will ever be made, right? So when you think about that, it kind of acts like a closed system, in that if I had a bucket and it was closed, there would be no leakage, right? But the dollar, because of inflation, many holes.
Yeah.
So which pail do you want to put your water in?
Right.
Right? Simply there. And in that analogy, you also have a different bucket. Like even if you're in the dollar, anything that's linked to the dollar will be affected by the dollar, right? Where this is a standalone system. So when you hear people say opt out of the current system, they're really opting out of this to go over to here. So,
I guess understanding the use of it, I know people invest in it. My son's involved in it, he's invested, he's made some money here and there or whatever in there, but I've also heard that people also, they purchase back and forth from each other in this kind of a thing.
circular economy.
Okay.
Yeah.
That kind of a thing. So is that pretty much what people are doing with it? That's the purpose for having that?
I think that's the ideal. I mean, if you think about it, like most people save in dollars and spend in dollars, right? And most Bitcoiners save in Bitcoin and spend in dollars. And I think it's there's a trajectory we're wanting to go to what we call hyper-Bitcoinization, where we're saving and spending in dollars or in Bitcoin. Right. So there's not just one. It's very fluid and it's still progressing, I guess.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So I thought I saw in your background that you were an educator. I can't remember, was that elementary school?
Elementary, yeah.
Okay.
Right. Currently,
Maybe
it's
a little advanced
pre-K
elementary
through
school,
fourth
but
music.
would your book be should I say a stepping stone or an introductory level of somewhere else in the K through 12 scale for kids to understand what Bitcoin is for the first time?
Absolutely, but probably not. And probably not because I just don't think it would get past certain checks and balances, let's say.
Maybe that's your next chapter, coming up with one that
I need to turn into a song. Maybe I should sing to him Rich Men North of Richmond. Should I sing that to him? Maybe adjust the lyrics a little bit.
Off the top of your head, is there any other technology or inventions that occurred in history that maybe took this same framework or touched some of those similar principles and how those were adopted or
Well, and even in the
accepted in society?
even in the decentralization, I think is what it was. Gutenberg printing press, the internet, right? Allowing information. If you think of money or conversations or relationships, whatever, as energy, right? We want energy to be as free-flowing as possible. And what I've noticed through the political process and everything, that just controls all that energy. It hoards it and then it wastes it away. So when you think of the printing press, those people back then, if you wanted to learn anything, you didn't know Latin, right? So you had to go to the local church and have them read it to you in their interpretation of it. Well, that's, holding off that energy. Same thing with the internet, information superhighway, right? It's just allowing energy to flow. So this is allowing, our digital monetary energy to flow. So it's just right along that arc. I don't know if that answered your question. Just riffing.
Okay, so I'm just learning about it too. So, but I'm just curious, what is the value of a Bitcoin today?
25.5. I think it had a dip recently. I don't know.
Okay.
25,500.
And just in your opinion, okay, let's say if the BRICS agreement is signed next week or this week, how much do you think it will go up?
I don't tend to.
This is not financial.
This is thank you. Yeah, I tend not to.
I think it will go up.
I mean, if you zoom out long enough, off of one event, who knows? And to me, that's. So I used to trade a lot back in the day, way before Bitcoin. I tried to learn options. I tried to learn technical, and I tried to learn all of that stuff. And I found out really quick that I was right about direction and wrong about timing. You know what I'm saying? And if you know anything about options, you could be right, but still be dead wrong by a day, right? You know what I'm saying? So to answer that, I think it will go up over time, but again, I'm personally not in it so much for the dollar gains, even though that would be nice. And I think put the dollar exchange rate before the societal benefits, potential societal benefits. That's like cart before the horse kind of thing. It's I think it'll come in good time.
So do you think it will protect some of your dollars in the event that happens?
And me personally,
inflation goes flying high.
I've probably been too down in the rabbit hole, but to me, it's about acquiring more Bitcoin. It's not about acquiring more to sell it to dollars later. Eventually, goods and services will be priced in Bitcoin. I mean, can I get an amen on that, right?
Yeah.
Right. And when that happens, what you have is a steady denominator. So if you think of fractions, 1/2, every time you increase the denominator of a fraction, the numerator is worth less. Pretty simple. Going back to basic math, right? So with Bitcoin, 21 million. Bam, solid. Never going to change. But with the dollar, when you talk about inflation, what is that? It's just money. And the denominator just keeps getting erratically greater and greater. So the value of that $1 that you have just keeps going down. So in my mind, why would I want something that keeps depreciating over time versus something that I know is fixed percentage?
Do you think the denominator is going to go down? So like if people lose their private
I think
keys
so,
and
but
stuff, right?
as Satoshi said, that's a donation to the network, right?
Right.
And back to the societal aspects of that, in a way that there's going to be tough lessons learned. One of the best ways to learn something is best way to find out the stove is hot is to touch it, right? You know, and over time, society. I know that's kind of harsh to the people who lose, but over time, maybe, and this I'm stretching here, but maybe that'll teach us to be more cautious, lower time preference as a society. I would think that would be a benefit. If people learn that lesson over and over again, maybe collectively we'll learn that lesson and be better off for it.
Can you speak to Bitcoin versus the, Ethereum, XRP, the thousands of others that are out there? Why Bitcoin versus those?
Great question.
They're all good?
Great question. No, they're not. And that comes from experience. I touched the stove. I was shaking around back in the days, and not so much anymore. The reason is because one reason. Well, let me go back to this. When I talk in scarcity, notice I put crypto in air quotes, altcoins, stablecoins, CBDCs. It's basically a digital version of fiat. There is a group controlling it. Let me even go to here. If you know anything about Ethereum, when they had, well, not so much permission, but it was centralized. They were able to mute the system when they had the big hack. They rolled the chain back. So basically, nobody really had that immutability. We realized it was centralized. It was also centralized because, and I'm just using Ethereum as an example, all the rest are very similar, but there was a 70% pre-mine. So out of the entire supply, that can also change, not very scarce, the founders took 70% of that for themselves. So what went into the market was 30%. Bitcoin didn't have that. It had a fair distribution. It was sufficiently decentralized. So when you look down the list, I would say all those cryptos, all those altcoins, whatever, would fall almost all in this column.
You had a previous slide that had gold on it there, this one. So, with FDR, they gathered up all the gold. So what keeps the governments from just canceling Bitcoin and saying, we're doing CBDC, you got to stick with our system, too bad.
And feel free to shout out, give credit to whoever said this. I can't remember right now, but you can't ban your people from Bitcoin. You can only ban yourself from using Bitcoin. I'm horribly butchering that phrase. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Who was that?
I don't know.
It sounds like Sailor. Somebody like that. Michael Saylor said something like that. But yeah, so in China, it was you? That was really good. So when China kicked out the miners, per se, well, first of all, there's still 20% of the hash rates in China, something like that. Anybody want to check my numbers? They didn't really turn off Bitcoin. They just tried to dissuade their people from using it, which is still in use. People can still hold it in their wallets. I mean, you remember 12 words in your head, you can go over borders, across borders, and still access as long as you have a smartphone and internet connection. Done.
Also, that's the part of decentralization. Bitcoin isn't running on Amazon.com or anything
Right.
like that. It's running in people's homes. It's running at River. It's running at everywhere. So even if the U.S. government says no, you can't do it anymore, are they gonna shut down every computer in America? That's not gonna happen.
And that's a great point. The term sufficiently decentralized is coming up to 20,000 nodes. I'm saying that's pretty close, right? 15, 16,000, somewhere in there. Spread out over the world. They're going to have to go to every single one of those, and even then, you got to go in it. You got it on satellites. How are we doing?
Plus the block size is so small, it can, like, it's very hard to actually put a firewall around it. It's not a bit, like, you can't really sniff those packets that easily. Like, technically, it's very, very hard to impossible problem to just stop. Like, it's like stopping the internet. How would you do that?
Yeah.
It's not possible at this point.
I think his point is though that if the government decides to try to punish it,
Oh yeah, they can.
then I mean it
That's
inhibits.
called the $5 hammer attack, right? Like,
Yeah.
So can you just address that quickly? I mean, I don't see
So
that they can punish it for long. Like you referred to FDR, after what, a year, they said, okay, well, all you felons, we're not going to do anything to you that kept your gold.
So I would speak to game theory there. If it doesn't go, if it's not here, it's going to go somewhere, right? And then as it continues to appreciate because of that finite supply, because of the demand, not just the demand for the number go up, but the demand for all of those societal benefits, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot if we were to do that, right? So there is a legitimate game theory check in place for doing that. So I don't think they will. I think there's enough people in the government, in places of persuasion or whatever, that realize this. So why would you do that? Is it possible? Sure. And would it slow down adoption? Slow it down. I don't think it would stop it. That's my take.
The way I see it, every government in the world would have to be on the same page and restrict internet, and I've never seen every government in the world agree on something, you know, so
Yeah.
it's like there's always
Yeah, that would require them to do IT.
Yes.
Is China buying Bitcoin? I mean, do they hold any Bitcoin?
I mean, not officially. I want to.
Officially.
There's no incentive
Yeah, I don't know
to
about the
say
state
yes.
itself.
Yeah. Absolutely. Great point.
There's no, yeah.
What is it 21 million? That doesn't seem like very much to me.
Which is divisible to the 8th decimal point.
there's 100 million within a Bitcoin, so you don't divide one Bitcoin.
And any coders in here, it's
That can be changed.
infinitely divisible. So, yeah, I mean, you don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I'll be happy to talk to you about that, because, but I'm getting the boot here. So
Yeah, we just got to get let's see, Mimi and Will Hoffner from River got a little presentation set up for us as well. So we can get a round of applause for Tim. If you have any questions, we have a space for time afterwards.